Once again, hello and welcome to the CEO Magazine. With this video, we are starting out on a new series called Trends, something that entrepreneurs may want to pay attention to, at least the serious ones, because anyone who takes seriously his or her responsibility towards any significant amount of wealth creation or an institution has got to watch these videos. You do not have to agree to the conclusions, but you do need to pay attention to the data. If you do not want to be caught napping at the wheels or wonder who pulled the rug under your feet, or perhaps wonder about the missed opportunities because you did not connect the dots, then you may want to listen to this conversation in its entirety. Today we have on our show Jeremy Rifkin, who advises heads of states and the European Union, among others. His thought leadership is popular and vast. Chinese Premier Li, who is a fan of Rifkin, told their state scholars to pay attention to what he talks about. He has served as an advisor to Angela Merkel of Germany, Sarkozy of France, José Socrates of Portugal, and Zapatero of Spain. If what he's seeing becomes a reality, it would be such a wonderful world. And even if it does not, there are some wonderful new opportunities for entrepreneurs ahead of you. So here is Jeremy Rifkin. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me today on the CEO Show.
My pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful. So you are one of those big thinking person, looking at the big picture from 64,000 feet view, looking at trends, things that other people won't even notice because they are off their radar. They just cannot connect dots, which is a great thing for large corporations, for nations, and people who are actually looking way down the line as to how things should be. But our magazine focuses more on the entrepreneurs. And so what I really wanted to get at is topics, concepts that they're probably not even thinking about, understand them in a language that is not academic, and at the same time be able to apply them in their daily lives, in their work, in their decisions, and say, I think I should be at least paying attention to this particular trend. So the book that you sent me is a great book, and I see at your background also the multiple copies, the Zero Marginal Cost Society. One of the things I notice is, and you talk about it, the dominant logic of any concept, of any phenomena, is very hard to dislodge because most people just take them axiomatically and say, well, there's no other way of thinking. This is it. And here you're trying to dislodge a lot of dominant logic, or perhaps as you talk about the paradigms, from the Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolution, which actually I had to read in my doctoral program at one point. The paradigm shift between relativism and positivism, but we won't go in there. So the thing that you're trying to dismantle, at least address, is fundamentally that there's a shift in our society from capitalism to what you call the collaborative systems, which were there in the past as well. So I wanted to get at what do you mean by that, and to really question you like anybody else would and say, nah, that doesn't sound right, because it's just so counterintuitive. So would you help me understand why you say that there's a shift from capitalism to the collaborative?
What we're beginning to see now, and it's very clear, is the emergence of a new economic system onto the world stage. It's called the collaborative commons. It's the first new economic system to emerge since the advent of capitalism and socialism in the early 19th century. So it's a remarkable historical event. It's already transforming our economic way of life. We're beginning to see a hybrid economy, part capitalist market, part collaborative commons. And this new system has the ability to greatly reduce the divide between rich and poor, democratize the economy, create all sorts of new business opportunities, and create a more ecologically oriented society. The trigger for this is called zero marginal cost. Now, marginal cost, we know in the business community, is the cost of producing an additional unit of a good or service once your fixed costs are already absorbed. There's a paradox we're discovering deep in the heart of capitalist theory that we just didn't see before because the technology wasn't there to make it obvious. And that is, we're always in search of new technologies that can increase our productivity, reduce our marginal cost, so we can put out cheaper products, win over consumers and market share, and bring some nice profits back to our investors. It's just we never imagined in our wildest expectations a technology revolution so extreme in its productivity that it could actually reduce those marginal costs to near zero, making goods potentially free, abundant, and sometimes beyond market forces. We've already begun to see this zero marginal cost phenomena invade an entire realm of the commercial market, the information goods industry, over the last 20 years. So what I'm writing about in the book is not academic. It began with music file sharing, Napster and the other file sharing services, where millions and then hundreds of millions of young people began to transform from consumers to prosumers. And they began to produce and share their own music with each other on a collaborative commons on the internet at near zero marginal cost, bypassing the recording industry. Then hundreds of millions of young people began to produce their own videos on YouTube, distributing them on the internet, on the commons at near zero marginal cost, bypassing the television and film industry. Then young people turned their attention to the news and information and knowledge industries, and they began producing their own news blogs and their own social media sites, bypassing magazines, newspapers, and finally book publishing. A lot of young people are putting out their own free ebooks. Bypassing the conventional capitalist companies. All of this at near zero marginal cost. And finally, the newest development is MOOCs, massive open online courses. This has all happened in 36 months. We now have 6 million students in virtually every country in the world, and they're taking these free online courses on the internet taught by some of the best professors at the best universities in the world.
Right. And you talk about this Mongolian kid who was found because of this. Otherwise, the talent would not be visible to those who need the talent, and the talent doesn't get the training that they need to become visible. So
exactly. And again, it's done at near zero marginal cost. Also, it's free. The kids are getting credit, college credits for it.
Now, I understand that MIT has put up their entire curriculum online.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing here is a democratization of an entire branch of commercial life called the information goods industries. We've got, at any given time, over 40% of the human race is on the internet, and every one of those people at some time or another has produced something of their own to share with other people on the internet. So these giant vertically integrated media, knowledge, and entertainment companies of the 20th century, which we thought were invincible, proved to be very vulnerable when millions and hundreds of millions of mainly young people began to create what we call lateral economies of scale. Millions of small people coming together at near zero marginal cost on the internet with this collaborative commons actually overpowered these giant vertically integrated media and knowledge companies. So, but here's the deal. We always assumed there was a firewall here, and that this zero marginal cost phenomenon, while it invaded the entire information goods industry and transformed it, creating new opportunities as well, we figured there was a firewall, and this zero marginal cost phenomena would not cross over from the virtual world of bits to the physical world of atoms, the brick and mortar world. And that firewall has now been breached, and it's going to change the economic equation fundamentally. We now have a technology revolution emerging. Let me put this in preface. Every great economic revolution in history comes together when 3 technologies converge, creating a general purpose technology platform. And those 3 technologies are new forms of communication to manage economic activity, new forms of energy to power economic activity, new forms of transport to move economic activity. So there are rare periods in history when those 3 technology revolutions come together at the same time and create a seamless new infrastructure for organizing economic life.
They bring the inflection point, just like the printing press did, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the printing press is a good example that you brought up. The 19th century, steam power printing emerged, so we reduced the marginal cost of producing massive amounts of print material, and then the telegraph. And this communication revolution then converged with cheap coal, the steam engine, as a new power source for energy, and a new transport vehicle called the locomotive on national rail systems. This allowed us to move from local to national markets, create national governments, and change the economy. We had a similar revolution in the 20th century, second industrial revolution. The new communication was centralized electricity, and really the telephone, later radio and television. And that communication medium converged with cheap oil, a new energy and power source, and a new transport vehicle called the internal combustion engine and national road systems. Right. And we began globalization.
And the implications are far-reaching because, at that point, they couldn't have envisioned what would the locomotive do, how the urban or the suburbans would spring up, how the Walmarts would spring up. You could have never imagined back then. So the implications are far-reaching. But I have this question. I understand what you're saying, and infopreneurship, as they call it, when you're talking about the selling of information with zero marginal cost. Completely understandable. There's a gentleman by the name Jeff Walker who's been written up on Forbes, and he has revolutionized the infopreneurship concept for the small person who is probably selling how to teach guitar, or something very simple that they want to teach, and now they're able to, with zero marketing budget, able to create a new system of services and products, perhaps, and create new markets and create wealth. Now, this guy has actually single-handedly been responsible for $400 million worth of small people solopreneurship, as we may call it, which would never have been possible in the past. And I do understand that. But to translate from selling of information to selling of goods seems like a stretch.
All right. It does seem like a stretch until you see the reality all around of us emerging in the last several months. We are beginning to see a new convergence of communication, energy, and transport, a third industrial revolution. The internet is morphing, and it's transforming into a super internet of things. So the communication internet that we all are familiar with is converging with a nascent renewable energy internet and a fledgling automated transport and logistics internet to create a super internet of things. 3 internets in one: communication internet, energy internet, transport internet. And sensors now are being attached to everything along the economic value chain to send data, big data, back to these 3 internets in this Internet of Things. So we now have 13 billion sensors connecting agricultural fields. We actually can monitor how the crops are growing. Sensors connecting warehouses, distribution centers, smart roads, so we can monitor traffic along the supply chain, the logistics chain. We have sensors on the factory floor telling us real-time production moment to moment. Even on the electricity grid now, with advanced meters, we have sensors telling us the price of electricity and which appliances are being used and which aren't at any given moment. Even retail stores, which amazes me, sensors now can tell the data can tell you who picked up an item, put it back on the shelf, or purchased it. By 2020, there's going to be 50 billion sensors connecting every device, everything with every human being, this Internet of Things. And by 2030, the latest projection, 100 trillion sensors connecting the whole world. Amazing. So we're actually creating this neural network where we're externalizing the nervous system of the human race so that we can be in touch with everything going on. Now, here's what it allows us to do, getting to social entrepreneurialism. Right. This means assuming net neutrality. That's a big assumption, as you know in the book. There's going to be a big challenge by telecom and cable companies and utility companies and all sorts of companies to undermine net neutrality. That means that no one's discriminated against, no one's left behind, everyone's treated the same as
the true assumptions of capitalistic economy are actually going to become real.
Yeah.
That information is available.
Now, assuming that the big data is available to everyone on the Internet of Things, it means you and I, as prosumers or social entrepreneurs, we can go up on that Internet of Things right now, and we can use our technology, our mobile technology and our apps to mine the big data going across that whole system, just like the big companies. We can use our own analytics, and with pre-programmed apps, we can dramatically increase our productivity, reduce our marginal cost, and produce our own physical goods and services, just like we're doing now with our mobile technologies and apps, producing and sharing our information goods. And I'm going to give you two fields where this is happening. Energy, renewable energy, and 3D printed physical products. Renewable energy has been quite extraordinary. You know, I advise the European Union and many heads of state in Europe, and we now have several million small players, social entrepreneurs, commercial entrepreneurs, homeowners, small businesses who are producing their own solar and wind generated green electricity right now. Millions of players on site with their cooperatives, producer and consumer cooperatives. In Germany alone, we're now at 27% green electricity. We're heading to 35% green electricity, solar and wind. And 3 weeks ago, this is amazing, 74% of all the power powering the electricity grid of this great country, Germany, was solar and wind generated green electricity. And so much electricity at near zero marginal cost, we had negative prices on the electricity grid the entire day. But the fixed costs are what's interesting. For a solar and wind technology, those costs are on an exponential curve, just like computer chips. You know, I remember when I was a kid, computers cost millions and millions of dollars. Today, the Chinese have a $25 smartphone, all right? So we've seen the same exponential curve in computer chips now in solar and wind. A solar watt of electricity cost $66 a watt to produce electricity in the 1970s. It's 66 cents a watt today, and it's heading on the same curve. It's going to be nearly free. But even before you pay back those fixed costs of putting the solar panel on or the wind turbine, the marginal costs are nearly free. The sun is free. It doesn't send a bill. You just have to grab it. The wind is free. Doesn't send a bill. You just have to secure it. And that heat coming up from the ground, the geothermal heat, it's all free. So we now actually in real time have millions of people and companies and social entrepreneurs and commercial sites. They're producing nearly free green energy. And then we're assembling an energy internet across Europe. We're taking internet technology, transforming the electricity grid to an energy internet so that if you have a surplus of green electricity you're generating, you can store it in hydrogen like we store media and digital. Then if you don't need some of that green electricity, you can program your app, if the price is right, to share your green electricity across an energy internet from the Irish Sea to Eastern Europe, just like you create information, store it in digital, share it online. That's happening right now.
So you're saying the concept of entropy, where the energy is used, although it's never wasted, it cannot be reused. Whereas now what you're saying is the supply of energy is becoming infinite, and even though it may be entropy, you don't need to reuse. It's infinite.
Yeah, that's true. There's always an entropy bill, but the sun is here for billions of years. The wind continues to blow. The geothermal heat under the ground, there's a lot of it. I mean, for time immemorial until kingdom comes.
So this abundance that you're talking about then, that there's going to be abundant energy. And energy is, besides food, and food is also dependent on energy, because there are things like vertical farms that are coming up. At least they're being tested, that, the hydro farms that people talk about. There's another concept where, you can have hydro farms, but they're vertically growing as opposed to be horizontally.
Yeah.
So food is going to be abundant, energy is abundant, therefore food is going to be abundant. Are you saying that truly there is going to be abundance, when we know that 2.5 billion people are undernourished, if nothing else?
But what I'd say, in the zero marginal cost society, I put all of the doubts, the challenges, the obstacles in the way. There's a lot of things that can prevent this. I would say the big wild card is climate change and cyber terrorism here. Cyber terrorism, I think we can address, the ability to shut down the system. In fact, when you move to this Internet of Things, it's so distributed. It's designed to be distributed, collaborative, so that if the cyber terrorists try to knock down any part of the system, it has so many tentacles that you can go off grid and still have microgrids and still stay in business. The big wild card is climate change, because what climate change does, it changes the water cycle of the earth. We're the watery planet. Everything depends on water. Most of our body is made out of water. For every 1 degree that the temperature rises on earth from climate change, the atmosphere is absorbing 7% more precipitation from the ground because the heat just sucks it up there. So we're getting more dramatic, we're getting more concentrations of precipitation and more extreme violent water events, more violent winter snows, more dramatic spring flooding everywhere, more prolonged summer droughts, more category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes, tsunamis, and typhoons. And it's devastating agriculture, lowering our agricultural yields everywhere in the world already. We're only in 2014. And it's really hurting infrastructure, costing us huge amounts of losses. So if we can't address climate change, free energy, nearly free energy, and we'll get to 3D printed products, won't be much good if we're not eating and we don't have availability of water.
Right.
What I say in the book is what allow us to address climate change is moving toward this Internet of Things platform for a third industrial revolution, because it moves us to renewable energies and it moves us to a sharing economy where the ultimate metric for sustainability is zero marginal cost.
Right.
Meaning, if you can minimize the inputs to get your output, you're using less of the Earth's resources. Then if you're sharing those near zero marginal cost on internet sites like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, you're using less, sharing it more at a smaller cost. That's the way to address climate change.
And when you say Airbnb, you're talking about the room sharing and automobile sharing is going to happen. I mean, if you got the Google driverless cars, the cars will be only for per use basis. You don't need to own a car. So that kind of trends are taking place where instead of ownership, you want access.
Let me give you an example. It's very dramatic. Uber has been in the news a lot.
Right.
And Uber uses all three of these internets already: communication, energy, and transport and logistics. If for Uber to set up a website, as you said earlier, what's the cost? The fixed costs are not that high to start your website. Then the marginal cost of letting someone who has an apartment to rent or a home to lease out to put them on the site is near zero marginal cost. If you're a renter or a homeowner, you're already paying your rent or your mortgage and your taxes. So the marginal cost of leasing out empty space is near zero marginal cost. So, but this is what's interesting about Airbnb and Uber. Let's use Uber. With Uber, you have a car. You're paying for it, you're leasing it, you're buying it, you're paying your insurance, etc. So you go on the Uber website, near zero marginal cost. Then what you do is they're using the logistics internet with GPS guidance. So they can instantly tell a driver and somebody who wants a driver where each is located in real time with GPS guidance. So within 3 minutes, you have that car. Now, to take it a step further, in Paris, Autolib, which is a car sharing service, has electric vehicles. And hundreds of thousands of people have been using them in the last 2 years. So they're reducing the energy cost. And now we have some electric vehicles that are powered by microgrids using renewable energy at near zero marginal cost. And as you said, in 10 years from now, those vehicles are going to be near driverless, again, and near zero marginal labor cost. So the energy is going to be nearly free, the labor is going to be nearly free, and it's the communication internet, the energy and logistics internet that allows companies like Uber and Autolib to begin to radically reduce those marginal costs of providing services. And here's what's really interesting. You may remember Larry Burns was the #2 at General Motors for many years, the vice president of new car development. He's now at the University of Michigan. He did an amazing study. Ann Arbor is a pretty big-sized city. And he found that even today with the rudimentary Internet of Things platform, communication, energy, logistics internet, in Ann Arbor you could get the same convenience and mobility, moving from ownership to access using 80% fewer vehicles right now. Now extrapolate that. We got 1 billion vehicles in the world, cars, buses, trucks. They emit a lot of CO2, use up a lot of the resources of the planet. They're not good for the environment. If you extrapolate his study, we don't need, within the next 20 years, as this Internet of Things emerges everywhere in big urban environments, we could eliminate 800 million of those billion vehicles, 80%. The other 200 million could be vehicles run by electric and fuel cell with near zero marginal cost renewable energy and be driverless. So imagine the automobile was the centerpiece of the entire 20th century second industrial revolution. The whole global economy depended on those resources. Boom. It's going to be out in 20 years. We're going to have access, not ownership, a dramatic reduction in vehicles, and people are going to have more convenience and mobility and driverless vehicles with their own energy.
And that's why the implications of what you're talking about are really critical for entrepreneurs and leaders to really understand. And you have to mull over it to get to it and to say, what am I supposed to do? How are things going to look? But as a average person, here are some of the questions. It just seems like so surreal. It just seems now that there's a problem here kind of thing. So let me point out a couple of things that come to my mind. Actually, three things. And I will just say those three first, and then we see what you think about it. Right. Number one thing is marginal costs for certain products have been pretty near zero in the past as well, like pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals, right? So the idea of profit is incredibly important. Even though the cost may be zero, marginal cost may be zero, I still want to make my profit because my motive is greed. Unlike the systems that you describe in collaborative commons, we are making an assumption, like Gandhi talked about, needs versus greed. That the Swadeshi system where we just produce and we eat, we consume what we need. We don't need the capitalistic system. We don't. When the Brits were leaving, he was talking about that we don't really need to copy the West or the socialistic system. We need to have what he used to call, I forget the word Swadeshi, the local village economy. Yeah. But the greed is the big factor. So even though marginal cost may be zero, I don't care. I as a producer need to make money, and my motive is making money. Whether the standard of living really increases by these trends, because now I have abundance and I don't need to produce as much to consume. So my standard of living is going up, but my greed is not changing. I still want to make money.
Okay, this is a good example you've used. It is true in the pharmaceutical industry, your fixed costs are high, but your marginal cost of producing those pills is really low, near zero marginal cost, close. Here's the difference. In those industries, it took technical expertise to produce those pills and to distribute them out into society so they could get a lock and a hold. And they could create giant vertically integrated companies that control the entire value chain upstream and downstream. So you and I aren't going to make those pills. All right. We don't have that expertise and we don't have the intellectual property. What's different here is we're beginning to see millions and now hundreds of millions of people produce their own first information goods, now energy, and now products. Let's take 3D printed products as an example. We now have hundreds of thousands of hobbyists and thousands of small startup businesses, some commercial, some social entrepreneurial. And they are going up on the Internet of Things already, and they're downloading free software to print out products. There's no intellectual property here, so there's no one controls it. It's open source. It's the Creative Commons. And then these small startup entrepreneurial enterprises are printing out their products using feedstock that's local garbage around the neighborhood. They're melting down local plastic. They just collect the plastic garbage. They're recycling local metal. They're recycling paper, and they're melting it all down to feedstock. They're even recycling. They're even melting down rocks and sand into feedstock and melting it. So they're not paying much for the feedstock. Then the software is instructing the product to build up layer by layer. You get a whole product with movable parts. You're using 1/10 of the materials of traditional factories because you're not subtracting to build the product. You're adding up the product. Then some of these fabrication labs, there are now fab labs all over the world, they're using their own green electricity produced on site from the solar panels and wind to power their factories. And now they're beginning to use electric vehicles to transport those 3D printed products to market with their own renewable energy. And pretty soon driverless.
But here's my other problem. I understand that now, unlike before, the requirement of capital to create new products and services is significantly reduced. I can start a business with very little money, and we'll talk about marketing as well, that marketing dollars needed are very little. So I get that. But at this point, for example, if you look at Fortune 500 companies, and there was somewhere I was reading that the beverages, 90% of the beverages are controlled by, very few, couple of three companies. Same thing goes with cheese, same thing goes with crackers, that it seems like they have different brands and you as a consumer don't know that they're actually being controlled by the same few individuals, so to speak, or companies, so to speak. And there was no capital investment. So Why is it that it happened? Why can't I make my own RC Cola and make it succeed? Is there something in the minds of people that they are not willing to accept anything else other than Coca-Cola?
You'll be able to do that. I have a section in the book on zero marginal cost society where we're now beginning to print out food, 3D printed food, 3D printed liquids. Yeah, if it's open source and everybody's sharing the data on all of this, yeah, we're already starting to do it. You can Google up and see 3D printed food, 3D printed beverages. It's starting. And even 3D printed pharmaceutical products. But then again, you have to take a look at the regulatory controls and the safety.
See, that's the other question, that the IP.
Yeah, for sure. But, you know, a lot of this is moving toward free. Again, you know, I spent the first 3 chapters in this book on the history of how modern capitalism emerged. And it's important because we don't really study that. I teach at the Wharton School. It's the oldest business school in the world. And I teach in the executive ed program, the corporate program. And even our CEOs from around the world, they just don't know the history of how capitalism emerged. What happened was that, again, in the first industrial revolution, when we created this new general purpose platform for technology, steam power printing, the telegraph, cheap coal, and locomotives on rail systems across countries, we needed a lot of capital. Building a locomotive and a rail system across the country, you couldn't finance with family fortunes and even with monarchies. You needed huge companies that could bring lots of capital and shareholders together. But because of the cost involved, you had to create vertically integrated companies that could create the efficiencies and economies of scale to get back your return on investment because it was a lot of capital. And let me say that these vertically integrated companies of the first and second industrial revolution, they were the most efficient model we could use. Certainly, a lot of their ability was to reduce the marginal cost, put out cheaper products, bring more consumption to people, and hire more workers on. Now, much of the profit went to the top, the 1%, but a lot of it flowed out to the mini, and a lot of us are better off today than our ancestors 300 years ago, at least if you were in the industrial cocoon, not in the colonies. But having said that, at the end of the second industrial revolution, we have about 4 or 5 power energy companies that control much of the energy, private companies, and you have state-owned companies. Underneath them, about 10 banks and investment companies that control over 60% of the investment. Underneath them, as you say, in each industry, a concentration of 4 or 5 major players: entertainment, the beverage industry, power and utilities, appliances. And if you look in every country, it's 4, 5, 6 players across every sector, because they are able to create these vertically integrated companies and the economies of scale to be able to compete, but it locked out new players. That was just the nature of the system. It was the most efficient system. Now, what's different here, the Internet of Things platform for a third industrial revolution, its architecture of the actual technology is not designed to be vertical. It's designed to be lateral. So the Internet of Things, the communication Internet, the renewable energy Internet, the transport and logistics Internet, are designed to be distributed, collaborative, and they value lateral economy of scale, where millions of small people come together. Think file sharing and music, think ebooks, think Wikipedia, think news blogs. And look at you, you're here on a blog. Fixed cost not high, marginal cost low. You still have to make money and stay in business, but you can now compete with a lot of newspapers that had much larger costs. So what I'm saying is this is actually happening. Look at the television industry. The average millennial young person in America watches 20 minutes of television a week now. Why? They're all on YouTube. They're watching each other's productions. Everyone's producing and sharing for each other. And near zero marginal cost.
It's very interesting you brought me up, because, and I'll be honest and open, the monetization is a hard part, because if the expectation is collaborative commons, then I need to be able to monetize.
That's right.
The motive is exactly what I was coming from. The motive still is greed. I need to do this because I love it, I like it, but I need to monetize it. So my motive is certainly greed at the same time. How does that work fit into this?
I'll tell you how it fits in. Let's take a look at Google, Facebook, and Twitter. All right? Their success is completely due to the fact that they developed a giant commons, a collaborative commons so that millions and hundreds of millions and billions of people could produce and share information, entertainment, etc., with each other at near zero marginal cost. So they owe their commercial success to creating these vast collaborative commons so that much of the human race could have access to knowledge. They could produce and share videos and audio and text with each other. Now, the rub here is, number one, is there room for more than a few Facebooks, Twitters, and Googles, because they can begin to control a large part of their sectors. Secondly, the monopoly factor. This whole point of the commons is to allow all of us to share freely and find value with each other. But we're now finding that the communication companies, the cable and telecom companies, are beginning to say, look, you know what? We don't like net neutrality. We built the pipes. We put in investment. We want to get a return. We want to be able to discriminate on prices, charge a little more, control some data. Of course, they don't tell us that obviously they do get paid. Every time you have a service provider, you have to pay those telecom and cable companies for that provision. But now even the Googles, Facebooks, and Twitters, they want net neutrality, but they also want to sequester our data. And so there's a contradiction here that their whole success is building an open, collaborative commons so that we can all produce and share each other. But in order for them to make money, they have to sell that data. It becomes theirs. Not only our personal data, but our content, because we're the content providers. We're providing all the content. Right. So, but they sequester that, the Google, Facebooks, and Twitter, sell it to third parties who then use it for commercial and other purposes. So there's a robust debate, as you know, emerging in Europe, where I work, saying we got to deal with net neutrality. And the question of if billions of people are now communicating with entertainment and news and knowledge, and they're providing the content as well as the personal data, shouldn't they be not just using this free, but shouldn't some of the control over that data and content, shouldn't that be in the hands of the people producing it, not just in Google, Facebook, and Twitter?
Right.
So we're going to begin to see, I love Google. I use it all day long. It's the magic box. It tells me what I need to know. But they have 8 billion queries a day. They're 2/3 of the research engine market in the US, 90% of the research engine market in Europe. If they shut down, where would we go? Let's look at Facebook. Facebook, our young people and staff like Facebook. I'm on it, I don't really use it much. But 1 out of every 6 human beings on the planet is now on Facebook, and the biggest family, extended family, communicating with each other in history, a fictional family. So we got to begin to, I think we're beginning to have a debate. We don't want to lose what these commercial enterprises have done. Now remember, they're not all commercial. Wikipedia set up a great global commons. It's one of the 2 or 3 most powerful sites in the world, but it's nonprofit. It doesn't have to be profit-making. Couchsurfing. Millions of people use Couchsurfing to share their homes, and they're just as big as Airbnb, which is a commercial site. So you're seeing a hybrid, part commercial.
See, and here's my point to it, that the traditional model is being broken. It seems you produce something which will not make any money. And then you've got to twist yourself to figure out, how am I going to make money besides this? The reason is that whatever I have produced, which I'm giving out for free, is actually creating data for me. Data in the sense, ownership of the data, the target audience, so to speak, that I realize that what I am creating is of value to a certain segment, and I have a certain number of those people who like what I do. And I have to give it for free. Then I have to figure out a way to monetize it. And that's the big twist that has happened, that you create a whole lot for free, which is part of the collaborative commons. And then you got to figure out a way to monetize.
All right, let me give you some ideas. Let me give you some ideas on how you do it. In a world where we're producing our own green electricity, we are sending it up on the internet in Europe, and we are getting paid for it. And then it's shared with others, okay? But it's bypassing these big vertically integrated companies. On 3D printed products, if you or I were to come up with a new 3D printed product, and we could have a Creative Commons license saying other people could use it with the obligation that they not proprietize it itself, then what we could do is get a credit for it. This happens on websites all the time, where I get a credit every time that I make this available to someone else. I get a credit that would allow me to then have somebody else to to access somebody else's product that they made and share it with me. And therefore, I'm getting all the value out of it, but it's not monetized. You follow me?
Are we getting into a barter economy?
Well, it's a more sophisticated. It's a sharing economy. In the feudal economy was a use economy. You produce to use locally. The capitalist market was an exchange economy. Some produced and then exchanged the property to others who bought. The collaborative commons is a sharing economy. That is, all of us become producers, but what we produce we can share with each other, get a credit, and then with that credit, use somebody else's product or invention that they did with us. We're already doing this in a lot of ways. Take ThredUp, which is a clothing site, or the new toy sites. If your little 2-year-old outgrows the clothes that you purchase, now you purchase them, maybe in the future, we're already 3D printing clothes. That's already happening. So right now, if you have a clothes for your little 2-year-old and she outgrows the clothes in 6 months, or she uses her toy and then, as you know, kids, after 2 weeks, they don't use the toy anymore. You can send the clothes back to ThredUp or the toy, and they sanitize it, and you get a credit for what it's worth. Then you can go up on their site, ThredUp is clothes, or the toy sites, and choose from hundreds of thousands of clothes and toys at the next level your child would want, and you get your credit can be cashed in to get that toy or clothes. Pretty soon we're going to 3D print our own toys, and people will 3D print clothes. And those who have the better designs, they're going to get the credit. People are going to want to have it, and boom, you got a major leap forward, like Etsy did with marketing with traditional businesses. Right now, I've just given you a new model. That's the first time I've ever talked about that. So I hope you get a lot of people paying attention to this, because this can be done tomorrow morning. So we each produce our own creative things. We get credits for sharing them. Every time it's shared, we get a credit, and it allows us to then download or have sent to us somebody else's creation. There's a business model right there. The other thing I should mention is, everyone says to me, my colleagues say to me, how do you make money if you're not in a capitalist market? There's no profit, there's no incentive. Wake up call. Cooperatives. 1.5 billion people are in cooperatives. Cooperatives are massive. They produce lots of revenue, and the people inside the cooperatives share the revenue. It's not based on profit to shareholders. There are hundreds of millions of people in cooperative housing in the developed world and in the industrial world. In some places, there are more people in cooperatives in both industrial and developing countries that own homes outright. There are millions of people who get their food from food cooperatives in the developed and the industrial countries. There are banking systems across Europe and around the world. The cooperative bank in France is the second largest banking system, and in some countries in Europe, more people invest in cooperative banks than in the stock markets. We have construction cooperatives, on and on and on. But again, this is another model which is designed to be distributed, collaborative, where small players come together. And let me give you the best example, Germany. This is instructive for the power and utility companies. 4 major power companies in Germany. They're big global companies, Vattel, EnBW, RWE, and E.ON. And we thought they were invincible. Well, within 5 years, they're out of power generation to a great extent for the new energies. The new green electricity is being produced by millions of small players in cooperatives, producer and consumer cooperatives, small businesses, etc. And the power companies, these big generating companies, they're producing less than 7% of the green electricity, and they're acknowledging they're out of it. They can't compete with near zero marginal cost. And because they're vertically integrated, they can't scale millions of small players. Just what happened in the music industry, the newspaper industries, the recording industry, the film industry is happening here. Now, does that mean it's over for the power companies? No. We gave them a new business model, and they're not leaving the old centralized fossil fuel and nuclear power model, but they're now beginning to develop this new model alongside of it. We said to them, look, get used to it. We now have millions of small players producing green electricity. In 10 years from now, hundreds of millions. In 20 years from now, if it moves on the same exponential curve, which it is, of computing, we'll have several billion players producing their own green electricity.
Let me ask you this question, Jeremy, then. Are you saying that the Pareto principle, the 80-20 principle, is now faltering, that it's not going to work anymore? It's not going to be the a paradigm that was thought by Stahl as a monolith, ununderstandable, but always working.
What do you mean the 80-20? I'm sorry.
That the production and output, that 80% of the 20% of the input produces 80% of the value. And that's why you see wealth being concentrated. That's why you see large corporations holding.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's already happening in the. This is already, as I say in the opening of this book, we've already seen this. So this is not conjecture. We've seen huge industries that have been flattened by information being shared at near zero marginal cost. Videos, music, news blogs, knowledge on Wikipedia, free ebooks, on a massive scale, forcing these industries into a disruptive change where they have to change their business model. And many of them are a fraction of their power just 5-10 years ago. We're now seeing it for sure in energy. We are seeing millions of players, Germany, other parts of Europe.
Won't they find some way to consolidate? For example, YouTube. I mean, everybody's producing. You can put it up for free for YouTube, but YouTube controls everything. Google controls everything. It seems like, England controlled the world 50, 100 years ago, and pretty much in a certain way, it's Google's imperialism. They can dictate which Fortune 500 company all of a sudden goes down because they decide to change the algorithm, and you're not going to be found on the fast search anymore.
That's why I have a section in the book on where I ask the question, is this Internet of Things, which can connect the entire human race in real time so that everybody can be engaged with everyone else across the economic chain and move from mass production to production by the masses, will this lead to the monopolization of everything or the democratization of everything or some compromise? I believe that the Googles, Facebooks, and Twitters have done a great service by creating these vast commons. But now they're looking like global social monopolies. When Google can control the knowledge of the world, and we have very little say as to how they use that, that's a problem. When Facebook can control how 1 out of every 6 human beings communicate with each other, that's a problem. When Twitter can control the conversation of 650 million people who are tweeting, that's an issue. So the great benefits they've created in creating a commons so the rest of us can produce and share communication information in near zero margin cost, we've democratized communication. However, the fact that they can sequester the data, these companies, and use it for whatever ends, it can be used for commercial ends, for advertising, for knocking out the others who are trying to do something similar. We're going to have some kind of a robust conversation. We're already having it in the EU, the European Union. These are social utilities. They provide a service that we need and we can't get it elsewhere. There are going to have to be regulations here. There's going to have to be some kind of global authority which will allow all 3 players to come to the table, government, industry, and the civil society, to determine some kind of governance, some codes, regulations, and standards so we can get the best of what they can offer us because they are aggregating the networks, but assure that they don't monopolize what they've created and undermine the great possibilities of democratizing the economy of the planet. It's a big challenge and struggle, and I think the jury is out. We don't know how this is going to proceed.
So in a certain sense, the game has really not changed. It's just that with what tools are you playing it is changing. So instead of being a beverage company or perhaps a media company, now you'll have to figure out, if you want to be a big company, how do you become this socially imperialistic or monopolistic new system that could have never been imagined. So really the changes not really. It's just a shift.
No, there's a real change. I'll explain why. People say to me, "Well, are you hopeful?" That I think we already in a dual economy, part capitalist market, part collaborative commons. We know this. We know this. And it's going to move. It's moving to energy. It's moving to 3D printed products. It's going to move to all sorts of things. But the question is, people say, well, you're being too optimistic. Now, if you know my past books, I'm not an optimist. I'm not naive. I've been doing this work for almost 45 years. I understand the issues and challenges here, and this is real problematic. However, I'm guardedly hopeful because I've seen what's happened when hundreds of millions and then billions of young people began to create their own music, videos, news, information, and blogs and share it with each other for near zero marginal cost on a collaborative commons. The betting person would have said, The big integrated, the big vertically integrated media, knowledge, and entertainment companies, they're invincible. They will squelch this. They'll monopolize it. They'll put in DRM. They'll put in encryption. They'll make sure that this can't happen. They couldn't succeed because it's too sweet a deal. The idea that we have a technology infrastructure that can then democratize our ability to create and share with each other is so sweet. It's the optimally efficient economy. And so they weren't able to stop it. Once the technology was available and the infrastructure, people just did it. They used it, independent. So I think as we head to energy, we're seeing this in Germany. Now, the new business model in Germany, there's something for the capitalist companies here. I have over 100 of the global companies in my global team. We are laying down infrastructure all over the world. So they want to make money by aggregating the networks. So what we say to them, if you're a power company, millions of us are going to produce the green electricity. We'll sell it to you. You don't generate the power anymore because it requires millions of little people sharing power together. You run the energy internet. That's a pretty technical thing. You aggregate the network, and the way you'll make money as a power and transmission company is you'll do what IBM did. IBM in the 1990s was in big trouble. Their big cash cow was their computer, the box. All of a sudden, the Koreans, the Indians, the Chinese, they all had the same box, just as good of quality as IBM. So the margins weren't there anymore. IBM had to reinvent itself and said, look, if nobody needs our box, what do we have that they need? Our expertise. We know how to manage information. So now IBM, Cisco, HP, they manage information. Every company in the world has a CIO, Chief Information Officer. What we're saying to the transmission companies, you're out of the power business over the long run. This isn't happening tomorrow morning. But increasingly, you will manage energy the way IBM manages information. You can mine the big data coming across the Internet of Things platform. The data going to the energy internet, the data going to the communication internet, the energy internet, the logistics internet. Mine the data with your analytics, create your own algorithms, and set up partnerships with thousands of little and big companies. And you help them manage their entire value chain by showing them how they can increase their aggregate energy efficiency, increase their productivity, reduce their marginal costs so they can keep their margins from collapsing, and then they'll share their productivity gains back with you, the power and transmission company. So actually, there's more money to be made by a transmission or utility company by selling less electricity and sharing in the productivity gains by a more efficient sharing of the productivity. And these companies are doing it now. If you take a look at E.ON in Germany, EDF and EDF have joined us in France in the layout of our Internet of Things, Third Industrial Revolution in all of northern France. So they're not leaving the old model. Nuclear and fossil fuels, vertical integration.
So I want to get to the innovation side. So the innovation is now happening at two different levels. One is at the granular individual level where previously it wasn't possible, but every human being can be an innovator in some way because fundamentally we are becoming about information because most of the things can be broken down into bits and pieces.
That's right. Everything's being digitalized. Information,
being digitized. Even your cell phone is being digitized because you can actually produce it in your home eventually, not right away, but people will have these 3D printers. My point is, so innovation can happen at the local level. That you don't need massive investments, massive capital, unlike you needed before. But on the other hand, there is innovation also at the large scale because to create these collaborative commons, as you call it, or as some people may call them, portals in a certain sense, that let me create a way to create communities. There's this company called Clarity.fm, which has basically brought together people with expertise and people who need expertise. So you can come in, join, pay for a phone call, $10 for 10 minutes of call, and I can call anyone and ask a question. So if I'm a publisher and I'm struggling, I want to talk to another publisher who's been successful and say, hey, here's the things I'm doing. What am I doing wrong? What are the 3 things you can tell me? So the point is, it's the community that you can create is where you can have innovation in creating those communities, creating content or products and services, which you can add at the individual level, and at the greater corporate level, so to speak, where the capital is required, where you do need something big. Now, an individual cannot do, as you're talking about these utility companies or Googles of the world. Are these the 3 places where innovation is going to happen? And what do you recommend to entrepreneurs how to think about that?
Well, these are, and of course, what's interesting in Germany, you know who's paying for the energy internet? The ratepayers. In other words, they're saying, oh, we need a lot of government involvement. Actually, what's happening is there are feed-in tariffs. So the government sets a limit where if you're an early adopter, you bring solar and wind on, you get a premium above market price for sending it back to the grid. And what's happened is that the early adoptions increases economies of scale, and the price goes down because the technology gets better and better. We've actually been able to move feed-in tariffs in and out very quickly because we're moving to parity. In other words, solar is almost at parity in many places. Wind is with traditional electricity, and solar and wind will be half the price of fossil fuels and nuclear within a handful of years. So it's already there, but who's paying for it? The utility companies then hike up the monthly bill to their ratepayers slightly to pay for the premiums for the feed-in tariffs, and now they're going to do the same thing for the advanced meters that start to digitalize the grid. So there's a short-term hump where the infrastructures, if all the small players have to pay a little bit, it gets the infrastructure in, but in the long run, they then can produce their own energy at near zero marginal cost. For a homeowner, a small business, or a big company, or a country, think of the productivity advantage if you can plug and play into a communication, energy, and logistics internet at near zero marginal cost. The productivity gains are through the roof. So that's one way. But let me also say it is going to require, as you're beginning, I think, to allude, we're going to have to have public investment and private investment in the infrastructure. Not as much as you would consider. Look at the logistics internet. We've got the satellites up there. We already have GPS guidance. Uber's already actually figured out how to create a logistics, energy, and communication internet. Uber goes up. You have your little technology in your home. You say, I want a car, Uber car. GPS satellite shows you where all the cars are that you could use. They connect the user with the driver, and in 3 minutes, the car's there. Your mobile app pays for it. You don't have to do anything. Boom. It's already there, the logistics internet with the satellites at near zero marginal cost. And pretty soon they'll be using their own vehicles with the electric and fuel cell in 2015 and 2016. So actually, they're even printing out their own cars, for God's sake. The Irby, which I'm sure you've seen, the first commercial prototype, printed out in Canada, six panels. It looks like a Mini Cooper. It goes 40 miles an hour, and it runs on solar at near zero marginal cost. So, Gandhi actually it's too bad he wasn't alive to see this, because in some ways, as I said in the book, Gandhi believed that there should be some way to have production by the masses instead of mass production. The problem was he wanted to move back to the traditional craft skills, which kept people in poverty. But now we've got a technology infrastructure that is so high-tech, this Internet of Things, and now with 3D printing and renewable energy installations and all of this other stuff, we can actually do what Gandhi set forth to do. Is that means everyone in the human race can produce locally, share globally at near zero or low cost, and share with each other.
He was a visionary in that sense, and I always support that idea. Most of the Indians don't, and I'm from the Indian origin. He started talking about the making yarn with.
It's just he couldn't compete with the cheap mass-produced goods and services of the first and second industrial revolution. So he said, make your own yarn, go get your own salt. So it kept people in poverty.
Right.
But he had the right idea. I mean, it took another century, if you will, another 70 years. Now we've got a technology revolution that allows us, with the Internet of Things, with information, with energy, with 3D printed products, we can actually produce ourselves.
But again, on the other hand, he was never interested in greed. He was interested in needs rather than greed.
Well, that's what this economy is all about. It's a sharing economy. And this whole idea of greed becomes less important. When you can produce what you need, the status symbol of those that have and those that have not goes away. Right. A lot of the reason we have scarcity is it feeds the idea that tomorrow could be a bad day, so you've got to hoard today.
Yes.
You never know what's going to come up.
I give you an example. When you see these in the Middle Eastern countries where there's scarcity of food, or the refugee camps, the truck comes in and you've got the loaf of bread. The need to hoard is about survival. once you take survival out of the picture, need to hoard goes away. You do what you love to do, you produce it, you enjoy it, you share it. If that was going to happen, then we are certainly elevated ourselves from an animal behavior to truly a human behavior, which is supposedly empathetic, supposedly social, where you don't do for the sake of showing that, look, I am a person who can survive. And
yeah, we're the most social creature. We have the biggest neocortex. Where the Enlightenment economists, especially the Brits and the Americans, not so much the continental Europeans, they said, look, babies are born to be autonomous agents. Adam Smith said each individual is born to pursue only their self-interest. He said they don't even care about the other interests, only their own interests, and want to be autonomous agents. That's just not what human nature is about through history. Economics comes from the word oikos in Greek. It means the household community. All through history, most economies, there's been feudal landlords and people have tried to take it, but local economies are sharing economies. Eleanor Holmstrom won the Nobel Prize, first woman to win the economics Nobel Prize. She went back and looked at the history of the commons. There are self-managed commons throughout the last 1,000 years of history that have maintained themselves in good and bad times, where people shared their resources. They had protocols, sanctions, punishments for violations, and the way they did it, some was private property, some was shared, and it was the best system to manage economic life. Now, the Internet of Things provides the technology platform so the sharing can be not just in your local little, neighborhood, but you can begin to share across geographic ranges and continental ranges.
This is wonderful, and it's esoteric. And I hope it goes this way. But from a greed perspective, which is, again, why we're doing this conversation, for an entrepreneur, what do you recommend? And specifically, I'll point out this issue again, and my issue, for example, that I produce this content, which is powerful, meaningful, but people have come to expect it for free. So I have to figure out a way to monetize it. So what I did was, or I'm working on is, okay, great content. People love the content, but they don't want to pay for it. But I need a community where people can come together, and therefore I provide a platform, and that would be the monetization part. And the reason they would come because is that there's a credibility associated with the CEO magazine, which is now ranked #1 worldwide, although not revenue producing, but this community will help. So this is called Do It Right, what I'm producing. Where Do It Right means the people who know how to do things right about certain issues. If you are getting into it, you go and talk to them, pay them X amount of money. They will support you for a week, a month, or a day in answering your questions. And so this is a platform. So what I'm trying to find out is the innovation that exists right in front of us, the need for innovation that exists right in front of us right at this moment for small-time entrepreneurs and even companies, or for mid-sized companies, is to create these platforms for infopreneurship or bits and digits?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to find a better idea. I mean, that's the car sharing services did it, then the house sharing services did it. Now people are sharing all sorts of other things together. They're finding new ways to create value, and not all of it has to be monetized traditionally. Advertising is not going to be able to do a lot of this, because what we're finding is, with more and more users going to mobile technology, they're not, those little ads on the mobile, they don't pay off for the advertisers because everyone's ignoring them. It's sort of like a pain in the ass, like when you watch TV and you ignore them. So there's, even Google has found that they've lost their growth, their growth revenue has decreased in growth. In other words, they're still growing, but at a smaller rate, because as they move to mobiles, there's less advertising going into this. It just doesn't pay off. I think we're going to see cooperative models emerge, just like in energy, where millions of small people came together, and as cooperatives, they share the revenue, they pool their resources. I think you'll find increasing number of social media sites creating cooperatives, so that people that want what they have to say will come in and they'll put up the revenue and share the gains together. I think that's going to happen. Similar subscription models are one way to do it, but cooperatives are another way to do it. If you have a value,
let me get to the last question. Then you also talk about that the cost of marketing is becoming significantly less and less as we go. And here's a prime example. The bulk of the money that was paid for marketing and broadcast media is reducing. It's going down. It's still big, but it's going down. And especially it is big for large corporations, but for small entrepreneurs, which actually are going to control 80% of the wealth as we move along, they don't need to spend money on advertising, not on broadcast media at least, because there wouldn't be a scope. And secondly, you could create these platforms where companies own the data. So if I want to reach out to, say, executive coaches, there are a couple or three places where they have lists of these executive coaches, and I could partner with them, which is, again, collaboration, and say, look, here's what I have to offer. You take X%, give me the rest. You have the people, I have the content or the product or the services. So in that sense, is that why you're saying cost of marketing is going down?
I'll give you an example. Etsy, Rob Kalin, this kid dropped out from New York University about 8 years ago. He wanted to build craft furniture in his apartment in Brooklyn. Then he realized he had to market it. So he got together with Rob Stitchin, another one of his roommates. They set up a little website near very low fixed cost. Today, 9 years later, we got 1 million businesses, small and medium-sized businesses in the most remote areas and the most urban areas of the world. And they're advertising their crafts and their businesses on Etsy free. They have a global network. And then 60 million consumers come there every month. They find the actual business they want to do business with, they make a deal. Etsy gets a small commission. So the actual marketing didn't cost them anything, just a small commission. Rob Kalin called me a number of years ago out of nowhere, and he introduced himself, and he didn't know that I had him in my book, The Third Industrial Revolution. And he said, well, what do I do now? And I said, you can retire. You've done enough. You create a new model here. And I was with the young people at their big anniversary last year. It's young people. They created a new service. They get a tiny commission. They brought together all these players, and they just went beyond the very expensive marketing of the 20th century. So if you're a small local business in Sierra Leone, you can go up on Etsy, and you have a worldwide audience for free at near zero marginal cost. It's disrupting what I'm saying in the zero marginal cost society. Whole industries, they're all going to be disrupted. It's already happening. We just don't want to connect the dots, as you said at the beginning, and we keep thinking that each new example is a small anomaly that can be absorbed. Oh, Uber, we can absorb that. Airbnb, maybe that can be absorbed. Just ruined the hotel industry. Car industry is going with Uber. Oh, whoops, energy in Germany. Now the big guys are out. Well, maybe we can absorb this. At some point, we're going to have to realize that there's a new economic system on the world stage. To the extent the capitalist market can work with the collaborative commons, find ways to create value, aggregate networks, because that's more technical, and find network solutions, you're going to have two vibrant economies working together. Sometimes they'll compete, sometimes they'll work together. But I would say the capitalist market will be here for a long time. There will be certain goods we will never get for free. We're not going to print out a transformer for a power grid for high velocity, for power transmission. That's going to require big, sophisticated expertise. But lots of places we're not.
But the change is taking place, and if you're not paying attention, you could lose opportunities.
Absolutely. Look at what's happening in the auto industry now, and the hotel industry, renewable energy. So my message here is that this is powerful. It is a disruptive technology revolution on the scale of the advent of electricity. It's going to affect every industry, already is. The smart companies are already looking at what we're saying here, and they're looking at how do we develop new business models and new ways so that we can be part of this commons, help this commons emerge, and find ways to be a partner in aggregating the networks, the solutions, and the processes. Then they can make the shift, and they will still be vibrant, profit-making businesses in the 21st century. But they won't be the exclusive arbiters of economic life. They'll be joint partners with the collaborative commons.
The important thing is that we must realize which way the wind is blowing, what's not changeable, what's not controllable, so might as well join them as opposed to oppose them. That's very important for the large corporations, those who are already stable and stalwart members of the society in terms of creating wealth. And second is the small players who have an opportunity sitting here that this upheaval is taking place. Will you benefit from it by thinking ahead, or will you just sit and watch what's happening? So I think those are the lessons.
I'm confident that the younger generation's on the move already. And
Yes.
It's good. This is going to create a better, I'm not a utopian. This shift to a zero marginal cost society and collaborative commons democratizes economic life, narrows the divide between the haves and have-nots, creates a more sustainable society. Why would we want to be still stuck in the 20th century with a handful of vertically integrated companies, the rich getting richer, more unemployment, slowing GDP, lower productivity? Why stick yourself in the past when you can create new entrepreneurial opportunities, both commercially and in the social entrepreneurial sector?
And you really can't control it. You really can't control it. Even if you want to, it can't be controlled. It's moving forward.
The technology is moving. The
I'll give you one simple example of the manifestation of this change that's taking place. There's a small city called Rajkot in Rajasthan in India. I don't know if the trains go there or not, but I'm not even sure if there's an airport. But it's one of those small towns. I don't know the exact numbers, but I would presume that an average person who gets out from a college over there and making money probably makes $200 to $400 a month, and no more. Maybe even that is on the high side. And so I was looking at what I needed for developing the website using Drupal, which is one of the technologies for creating content sites. And so I found this guy on the system who seemed to be really, really knowledgeable. And I called him up and asked him for his rates, and he says, I charge $80 an hour. I said, dude, I'm from India. I know, and I know what you're talking about. $80 an hour. That's absolutely out of the world. Even in the US, I wouldn't pay that much. He says, look, I do something very special. Yeah, he was about 20-something. I do something very special. I don't have to work all day long. I work very little, but I do my job very well. My rates are $80 an hour. You want to take it? Take it. Don't want to take it, leave it, go find someone else. And it was empowering to say, well, there's this tiny guy who never had any opportunities in the past. He would have not even gotten out of Rajkot. He would probably been doing some menial work and a happy life. And now here's this fellow who's got the audacity to say, take it or leave it. I'm not even going to make it $75 an hour.
Well, now speculate here. We have the Chinese smartphone now at $25, connects you to the world. Right. So now over 40% of the human race is now connected to the internet. Pretty soon 100% is going to be connected within the next 10 years, because if you're making $2 a day, it means in 21 days you can pay back and have a smart cell phone and be connected to the human race and begin to learn and be able to take credit courses from the best universities on massive open online things. You can create your own energy locally and not have to be worried about the big power companies. Create your own 3D printed products out and download your own free software. It's a new world.
It's a new world. I tell my daughters that, I don't have to worry about your education. If you really want to be educated, you will find your own way without spending the money.
Absolutely.
Jeremy, thank you so much. I absolutely enjoyed talking with you.
My pleasure. Thank you. I enjoyed the interview. We stay in touch.